For months, people kept asking the same question about 3I Atlas. What is it? But that may no longer be the right question, because now the more disturbing question is this. What is it doing? As it approached Jupiter's gravitational frontier, the data stopped looking like the path of a simple interstellar wanderer and started looking like a sequence. The alignment was too precise. The timing was too convenient. The water release was too large, and the jet geometry was too clean. Music to feel comfortable. That is why a few scientists have started entertaining an idea that sounds almost absurd until you stack the details together. Maybe 3I Atlas did not come here just to pass through. Maybe it came here to stop, deploy, refuel, or establish a foothold at the one planet in the solar system best suited for long-term expansion. And if that sounds extreme, then Jupiter is exactly where the story gets worse. Because Jupiter is not just a giant planet. It is a gravitational machine, a capture zone, a natural braking system, and a gateway to moons loaded with water. If an advanced payload wanted to enter our solar system and build outward from a resource-rich base, Jupiter would not be a random stop. It would be the perfect first colony site. To understand why people are so unsettled, you have to start with Jupiter's Hill sphere. This is the vast gravitational region where Jupiter's pull can overpower the Sun's and capture objects into stable Jovian space. That makes it more than an orbital curiosity. It makes it the one place where a smaller payload released from a passing object could stay behind permanently instead of just continuing out into deep space. And 3I Atlas did not just wander vaguely near that region. It passed through it with disturbing precision. In one set of figures, the closest approach lands almost exactly on Jupiter's capture boundary, with a difference so tiny compared to the scale of the encounter that it immediately stops feeling casual. Once that happens, Jupiter no longer looks like scenery. It looks like the point of the maneuver, like a spacecraft threading the only doorway that matters. 3I Atlas approached the one boundary in the solar system where something could be released and remain there. The route into the solar system already looked wrong long before Jupiter entered the picture. Our planetary system is arranged like a flat disk, and a random interstellar object should usually arrive at a steeper, more arbitrary angle. But 3I Atlas came in only about 5 degrees off the orbital plane. That alone is statistically uncomfortable. Then it made close approaches that linked Mars, the Sun, and Jupiter in a chain of encounters that some researchers estimate at around 1 in 20,000 for pure chance. Then came perihelion, and the timing became even more eerie. At the exact moment when the most important inner solar system activity should have been happening, Earth was on the opposite side of the Sun and could not observe it directly. If you wanted a critical phase to occur outside direct terrestrial view, the timing could hardly have been better. That does not prove design by itself, but stacked on top of the alignment, the close approaches, and the later Jupiter pass, it becomes much harder to shrug off as one more coincidence. It starts to feel like a route was not merely followed, but tuned. Then the story moves from trajectory into logistics. After perihelion, SOHO detected a huge hydrogen cloud around 3I Atlas, and the estimated release corresponded to around 13.5 million metric tons of water in just 1 month. Water alone does not make something artificial, of course. Comets carry water. But what makes this detail so unnerving is what water means in a propulsion context. Split it through electrolysis, and you get hydrogen and oxygen, 2 of the most powerful rocket propellants ever used by human spaceflight. In that interpretation, the object is not just carrying ice. It is carrying a self-renewing fuel source. And once you place that next to Jupiter, the whole theory becomes harder to ignore. Jupiter's moon system, especially Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, is loaded with water potentially on a staggering scale. That means Jupiter is not just a place to slow down. It is a place to resupply. A civilization using interstellar hitchhiking would not need to bring all its fuel across the galaxy if it knew where to stop and harvest more. In that picture, 3I Atlas starts to look less like a visitor and more like a delivery vehicle arriving at the first major depot in a new system. This is where many people stop feeling comfortable calling it just a comet. Hubble observations showed 3 distinct jets emerging from the nucleus spaced almost exactly 120 degrees apart. That kind of perfect triangular symmetry is not what people expect from natural outgassing. Natural cometary jets usually come from messy geology, patchy volatile pockets, irregular heating, and unstable surface behavior. But these jets held a remarkably stable geometry, and the whole system even showed a periodic wobble consistent with controlled rotational behavior. Why does that matter? Because 3 equally spaced jets are exactly the kind of geometry engineers like for balanced thrust and attitude control. Once you pair that with the object's non-gravitational acceleration and the way the final flyby lands at Jupiter's capture boundary, the jets stop looking like decorative anomalies. They start looking like the mechanism that shaped the final approach. And that is the point where the colonization theory becomes genuinely chilling. If the trajectory was being adjusted on purpose, then Jupiter may not have been the obstacle this object had to survive. It may have been the place it was trying to reach all along. This is the point where the whole story stops sounding like a random flyby and starts sounding like insertion. Because if 3I Atlas carried a smaller payload, something dormant, something hidden, something meant to detach, then Jupiter is the one place where that move actually makes sense. Not Earth, not Mars, not the asteroid belt. Jupiter. Its gravity is strong enough to capture objects. Its system is vast enough to hide them, and its moons offer the raw materials needed for long-term survival. That is why the colonization theory feels so disturbing. A payload released into Jovian space would not need to announce itself. It would only need to remain. It could drift, stabilize, and begin using the environment quietly. Like a seed dropped into the richest soil in the solar system, the object would not need to conquer anything immediately. It would only need to establish a foothold. And once that foothold exists inside the Jupiter system, expansion outward becomes a matter of time, not possibility. The reason Jupiter matters so much is not only gravity. It is infrastructure. Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto are not just moons orbiting a giant planet. They are vast reservoirs of water ice, chemical potential, and strategic shelter. In human mission planning, those worlds are already seen as some of the most valuable locations in the outer solar system. So if an advanced system entered our neighborhood looking for a place to build, hide, refuel, or multiply, the Jovian moon system would not be a bad guess. It would be the obvious one, and that is what gives the whole idea its darker edge. Because colonization does not need to begin with cities, fleets, or DRA across the outer solar system. Like building a harbor before building an empire, the first step would not be visible conquest. It would be quiet establishment in the richest frontier available. By this point, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. The near-plane arrival, the chain of close encounters, the hidden perihelion timing behind the sun from Earth's perspective, the huge water release, the stable 3-jet geometry, the non-gravitational acceleration, and finally, the pass through Jupiter's capture boundary. Any one of those anomalies alone could still be defended as exotic but natural. But together, they stop feeling like random features of one strange comet. They start to resemble a profile, a sequence, a mission architecture. That is why some scientists are no longer just asking what 3I Atlas is made of. They're asking what the object was optimized to do. Because the route makes logistical sense. The chemistry makes logistical sense. The water makes logistical sense. The jets make navigational sense. And Jupiter makes strategic sense. Like reading a flight plan backward after the craft has already landed, the event begins to look less like cosmic improvisation and more like an operation whose purpose only becomes obvious once the final target is reached. And that is the thought that makes this theory genuinely horrifying. Because if Jupiter was not the destination, but the first base, then the title stops sounding exaggerated. In that scenario, colonizing Jupiter is not the end game. It is the opening move. Once a system is established there, the rest of the solar system becomes progressively more accessible. The asteroid belt becomes a resource field, Saturn becomes another outer hub. Inner system observation becomes easier. Expansion no longer depends on crossing interstellar space again. It depends on building outward from the first successful insertion point. That is why the world is watching this object so closely. Not because every dark theory has been proven, but because the logic chain is so hard to emotionally ignore once you see it assembled. If something came here with fuel, guidance, timing, and a perfect gravitational insertion opportunity, then Jupiter may not be where the mystery ends. It may be where the real story begins. Like watching the first landing party arrive on a distant shore while the main fleet remains hidden beyond the horizon. 3I Atlas may have been far more than a visitor. It may have been the scout. For most people, 3I Atlas still sounds like one more strange object passing through the solar system. Rare, yes. Unusual, yes. But still something nature might eventually explain away. That is the comforting version of the story. But the more closely the full sequence is examined, the harder that comfort becomes to hold. Because this was not just an ancient interstellar body drifting past at random. It arrived on an unervingly aligned path, crossed the inner system under suspicious timing, released massive amounts of water, displayed stable three-jet geometry, and then passed through the one gravitational boundary where a smaller payload could be left behind in Jovian space. That is what makes the colonization theory feel so disturbing. Not because it has already been proven in some dramatic cinematic sense, but because the logic of it is difficult to shake once the pieces are stacked together. Jupiter is not just a planet. It is a capture zone, a shielded outer base, and the gateway to moons rich in water and long-term resources. If something wanted a foothold in the solar system, it would not need to begin with Earth. It would begin with the place that offers gravity, concealment, energy, and expansion potential. And that place is Jupiter. In that picture, 3I Atlas does not look like a tourist. It looks like a first move. And maybe that is the deepest fear hiding inside this entire story. Not that one object passed by, but that the passage may have had purpose. That what looked like a flyby may actually have been an insertion. That what looked like an anomaly may actually have been a strategy. And if that is true, then Jupiter is not the end of first footprint in the snow and realizing too late that it is not the only one. 3I Atlas may have been the moment we stopped asking what arrived and started asking what remains. So now the question is no longer whether scientists fear 3I Atlas is here to colonize Jupiter. The real question is this. If Jupiter was the insertion point, how long before the rest of the solar system becomes part, music of the mission? If you enjoyed this video, drop your theory in the comments below. Do you think 3I Atlas was just an extraordinary interstellar object? Or do you think its Jupiter passage was the first stage of something much larger? And subscribe, because if Jupiter was not the detour, but the plan, then what comes next may be the most important story humanity has ever had to understand.